We need to remain human, but also approach AI topics with courage and awareness.
The great thing about artificial intelligence is that if you use it correctly and think about it a bit, this time ChatGPT itself actually enables you.
Of course, on the one hand, that stirs up fears, but it also creates completely unrealistic expectations.
Leadership culture needs to be clearly strengthened. So leadership is more important than ever.
Yes, dear listeners, we are happy to record another episode of our podcast, Digital.Decoded, today. Alongside André, hello André, we also have a guest with us today, David Laux. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Hello David, we're glad you're here with us today. Maybe you'd like to say a few words about yourself, about your background and experience. But today we want to talk with you about the topic of data versus intuition, how AI is changing leadership. And as a CEO, you naturally have a lot to share and a huge background. So please briefly introduce yourself.
Yes. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the podcast. I really appreciate it. My name is David Laux. I am 53 years old and co-founder of Digital, which we started 25 years ago. I was invited to speak today about leadership and management, as well as AI. And yes, I'm really looking forward to it and am very excited about the dialogue with you.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, David. I mean, we've known each other for 20 years now. In that sense, I'm also happy that you're here today and that we can really benefit from your wealth of experience.
Yes, David, first of all, a warm welcome from me and thank you for being here. And of course, a warm welcome to our listeners and viewers on the usual podcast platforms on YouTube and so on. And David, you just mentioned it, 25 years of digital, including that of the predecessor organization. And in the last 25 years, Mario's and my knowledge in the area of leadership has, of course, changed a lot. Yes, there used to be the classic approaches to leadership. Then came COVID and a lot changed regarding the topic of leadership, but also, how should I put it, many resolutions that at the end of the day couldn't actually be fulfilled. And now the topic of AI is coming up, which in my view also has a strong impact on the subject of leadership. What do you think about that? That's something I'd be interested in at the beginning. When you think about AI and leadership, what comes to mind? What is your own biggest personal challenge in this regard?
Well, over the past 25 years, and also a bit in preparation for our podcast, I've been reflecting on this topic again. Looking back, the topic of data has always been very relevant. And of course, as a CEO or managing director, you need access to data. And at some point, data evolved into the topic of business intelligence. That means at first, the goal was to understand the intelligence within the data, the numbers and the facts. Then about a decade later, the focus shifted to predictive analytics and intelligence. In other words, can you make predictions? Can you derive actionable recommendations from the data and facts? And now I would say for about the past 2 years, the topic of AI has been omnipresent and of course greatly supports leadership as well as decision making. I think that's a fundamental shift and a significant change. I believe that's where the opportunity lies, but at the same time, it's also the challenge because in the past, leadership was very much based on experience, intuition, and also a bit of interpersonal instinct. But today it is becoming increasingly important to have the ability to effectively use data-driven systems or artificial intelligence tools in a truly meaningful and responsible way. To make proper use of them and to handle these technologies appropriately is essential. And I think that's the biggest change.
Yes, I have a very quick follow-up question, David. And I mean, you just explained it. So the various technologies that have gradually found their way into the topic of leadership over the years have certainly made many things faster, but also a lot more transparent. You now have much quicker access, not just to the data, but of course also to the analyses. But what about the human component in leadership? Do you think that empathy or emotional intelligence has become more important in leadership because of technology, because of AI?
I have a very clear opinion on that. In my view, empathy and human closeness are becoming increasingly important and relevant. On the one hand, we also have to add that alongside the topic of AI, the whole issue of remote work has become even more prominent over the past 4 years. This means that leaders now have to be able to convey empathy effective communication and a sense of humanity virtually as well, in principle. And of course, that makes the whole topic even more challenging because in the past, people often met in person and held many on-site meetings, which were used to engage in intensive exchanges. And personal contact is, of course, extremely important. But even that, especially in the last 4 years, has changed to some extent. To a large extent, this has put leadership responsibility to the test. I think, to come back to your question, empathy is even more important now, as is human closeness in times of AI and the whole topic of remote work. And this is really the clear and essential task for leaders to carefully implement this as well as possible, because ultimately it's important that we establish and maintain a company culture that is also fundamentally based on strong values. And in our organization, humanity and individuality are both extremely important values. I truly believe that artificial intelligence, or AI, can make a meaningful contribution here, but it simply cannot replace people, leadership, or genuine empathy.
Yes, I completely agree, because we experience that every day in our shared organization. On the other hand, it's also true that it's really difficult to bring the topic of AI into an organization, not just for us, but generally in many organizations. And I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that. How can a leader with all this technology avoid losing sight of people while at the same time serving as a role model? Both of us use AI a lot, and we do so every day. But from your perspective, how can someone really be a role model within the organization?
On the one hand, the company, in our case, us as Digital, needs to provide clear and specific guidance on how we ourselves use AI. That means, on the one hand, we have to enable and empower employees to use artificial intelligence or AI for themselves in a positive way. We introduced Microsoft Copilot very early on. That was the first decision we made. We are currently in the process of setting up a gateway where, as part of a pilot project, we want to give all employees across the company the opportunity to use various AI tools, all accessible from a single gateway. That means there are different levels of quality when it comes to the results from the AI tools, and we also want to challenge them against each other to some extent. That means, of course, we are trying to empower employees to use and apply AI themselves, and also to alleviate some of the fear of the unknown, to give them the opportunity to strengthen themselves by using AI in a way that fits their job or their personal needs. On the other hand, clear communication is needed. In my personal view, it must not appear as though artificial intelligence or AI is making decisions for us. Rather, AI can prepare decisions by providing thorough analyses, relevant data, detailed comparisons, and by structuring complex concepts. However, these must ultimately still be carefully reviewed, further processed, thoughtfully refined, and supplemented by humans. And the decision itself must very clearly remain with humans. By actually enabling people, I believe you can motivate employees more strongly to engage with the topic of AI and to see it not as a risk, but as an opportunity.
I'd like to briefly jump in here, André, specifically on this point about the use of AI. I think one aspect is to make it widespread, and the other, as you mentioned, David, is to use AI responsibly. What I've noticed a bit, even within our own organization, is that many people are now using ChatGPT. The question then arises, do we take a critical look at what ChatGPT actually provides us? Do we read it again, make it our own, and truly adopt it? Because as you can see everywhere these days, many people just copy and paste ChatGPT results, but most of the time that has nothing to do with their own voice, even though, of course, you can train it. And on the other hand, of course, the content is sometimes simply wrong. Links are incorrect. We all know that. Everyone who uses it, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And how do you see that in your environment? So putting us as a company aside for a moment, what kind of experiences have you had with that in your network, David? How is it being used?
I mean, in all of our leadership team meetings, as well as in our strategy meetings, we also consistently use AI as part of our preparation. That means we simply utilize the tool to make our preparation process more efficient. I think what comes out of it, and we just recently had a strategy workshop specifically on the topic of AI, is that we are able to approach our discussions with greater insight and readiness than before. That was already an extremely good foundation, so to speak. That means you actually reach about an 80% level pretty quickly, so to speak, where you can build on it. And then it's really about enriching these analyses or these concepts and structures, which you essentially put together using intelligent prompts, and then discussing them for their relevance and matching them appropriately to us as an organization. And I think the great thing about this topic is that we can actually focus on the last 20%. Of course, it's important to read the 80% and to consider it understandable and correct. But as a leader, you can actually save a lot of time and really focus on the real key points, working on them in a more targeted and efficient way.
Yes, perfect.
David brings up a great topic, namely the keyword uncertainty. Yes, now we all come from IT-oriented industries. Of course, you yourselves have managed many IT implementation projects in various constellations. I also come from IT, and when it comes to technology and technology adoption, I would say it's something natural, something that works regularly, and something you have to grow with. But there are also other industries where technology, specifically IT technology, hasn't necessarily had such a high priority. And now we've experienced the topic of digitalization, which has already triggered fears and raised questions. Now, the topic of AI is coming up, and of course, it's causing even more uncertainty. So will my job still exist tomorrow? What should the future look like? And so on and so forth. How do you see this with customers? How has their approach to AI changed to some extent? And how do you personally address the issue of uncertainty with customers?
Yes, I think that's fundamentally one of the core topics we discuss. The issue of uncertainty among customers and employees, which is a significant concern. In the end, of course, there's also a prevailing opinion, driven in part by the media, that AI is now brutally replacing everything and everyone, and that this is somehow unstoppable. I mean, thank God we have appropriate regulations in our country that, of course, also protect people as such. But of course, you have to address these uncertainties, which naturally also depend a bit on the industry and sector. You just mentioned it. There are, of course, companies that are less IT driven and therefore less AI driven than others. Of course, there's a bit more work to be done there at first, because it's also very much about communication. So what exactly do we want to achieve by using artificial intelligence? And naturally, in addition to communication, I think it's also important to clearly define which use cases you want to address with it, what impact it will have on the daily work of individuals or the affected department, and what added value can be gained from it. And I truly believe that the real opportunity lies in closely working together with our customers to collaboratively develop use cases that can provide meaningful added value for everyone involved within an organization, even down to the individual employee who, for example, is relieved of repetitive routine tasks and can then, as a result, focus on higher value activities in their job. Again, it's about the fact that, from my perspective, this is a major change management process, because you're changing the organization and how it will work in the future. AI is basically like a trusted colleague who now takes over certain routine and repetitive tasks, automates specific processes, or carefully prepares certain important communications. It's essentially a kind of personal assistant for the employee, the department, or even the entire organization. And essentially, the goal is to eliminate sources of error, achieve scalability and speed, and also address topics that people might not always be able to cover 100%, like language issues, for example, translation topics, or 24/7 support, where in the past employees simply had to be on call day and night. Today, you can, of course, cover such needs excellently with, for example, voice AI agents, and essentially offer a kind of third-level support. So I believe that if you package it properly into real use cases and clearly communicate the added value, you can also alleviate some of the uncertainty among people and within the organization. But at the same time, you also have to enable these people to use AI themselves. Yes, both in your job and perhaps for your personal life as well. And I think that's where the key lies. So the unknown really needs to be trained and learned in order to somewhat put into perspective the fears about the supposed power of AI.
Yes, David, thank you very much. You really speak from my heart, because I think I said this to a client recently. Digitalization was already not an IT project, and AI is even less so. Yes, so it's not an IT project, but as you said, it's a complete change project for an organization where it's about concrete use cases. I think you made a very, very important point there. And the other thing is, as you mentioned at the beginning, a lot is promised in the press as well. Fears are also being stoked. And I don't know about you, David and Mario, but I see almost daily, for example, on LinkedIn, some posts saying rest in peace PowerPoint and that the business of management consultants is dead. Of course, on the one hand, that stirs up fears, but it also creates completely unrealistic expectations. And I think maybe our podcast, Mario, can help a little to provide some clarification that the human component is still needed. But of course, a lot of change is happening because of this technology.
But I would like to revisit the topic of enablement that David mentioned. For me, if you look at the past few years, a real game changer in terms of access to knowledge was Google back then. Yes, I think when Google first came out, everyone associated something with it, when it was, and what suddenly became accessible. And back then, the advantage of Google was that you really just had this one field, you asked a question, and you got a great result accordingly. And what really occupies my mind now is the topic of AI. So if you take ChatGPT, for example, and we also talk to our people, everyone immediately calls for enablement. And for me, the question is, this is also about the topic of responsibility, of who needs to take the initiative. Especially among technologists, I think this should be even more pronounced. Because if you look at a classic ChatGPT, I find it similar to Google back then. You can ask a question, even by voice nowadays, and you get great answers, and you can even have a dialogue with it. The great thing about artificial intelligence, if you use it correctly and think about it a bit, is that ChatGPT actually enables you by itself, which Google search could never do. And I believe if you engage with it, and I'm an autodidact myself, I've never taken a ChatGPT course or anything like that, and you probably haven't either, André. You can really teach yourself this stuff nowadays, in my opinion, and achieve huge results. But if you then get the right support, of course, that adds even more value. And there's one thing I'd like to know, David. Many people say AI is a game changer. Coming back to leadership, would you say that AI fundamentally changes the role of leaders, or is it more of a complement?
Good question. To be honest, I really think it's a clear addition. So you need classic leadership qualities. You need communication skills. I think that's important as a leader. Decisiveness. That means as a leader, someone in the organization has to make a decision. Earlier, I mentioned the topic of empathy. That's an absolutely core issue. And I always say, if you have no interest in people, then you shouldn't be a leader. And there's nothing worse than when you're in the US and someone asks you, how are you? And the person who asked doesn't actually care at all how you're doing and just turns on their heel and pours themselves a coffee. So that means having a genuine interest in people. Yes, that's a basic requirement, strategic thinking. And I think for me as a CEO, ChatGPT is currently the most helpful tool because I use it the most. And it's basically like a sparring partner for me that actually engages in a dialogue with me. And that's also the difference from what you said, Mario. The Google thing was more of a binary topic. I searched for something, I got a result, but I couldn't have a dialogue. So now, basically, I have a virtually free sparring partner who has access to vast amounts of data, excellent and detailed graphics, comprehensive results, and a wide range of studies, and who in real time enriches my knowledge through thoughtful dialogue and actually gives me a genuine, significant advantage. And I think it's really important, truly important, that we actually see and understand this as a supplement. It's because an artificial intelligence or AI should never be the one to make decisions on its own. At least that's my credo. An AI can help prepare decisions, and it can do so in a targeted and guided dialogue led by the manager.
But we're actually not far apart on this, because that's exactly what I meant when I said that in the past, no one at Google was clamoring for enablement. Maybe the word didn't even exist yet. But now, when you actually have exactly this tool that allows you to enter into a dialogue, and as you nicely put it, you have a great sparring partner, now there's a huge demand for enablement. And I find that fascinating.
Because honestly, enablement is something I also notice within our leadership team. We need a much better understanding of data and also of how to use digital tools. Now we have access to a lot more data, and as a result, as leaders, we're much more challenged to understand and interpret that data. So interpreting the data in relation to the business, to leadership, to decision making, that's actually one of the main challenges. And I see that the complexity for leaders is actually increasing, because in the past you would look at a P&L, maybe a balance sheet, and maybe 2 or 3 Excel sheets. And today, when I see how our leadership team meetings are conducted, we have an incredible amount of additional evaluations, analyses, data benchmarks, whether it's for regular operational meetings or for strategy meetings. And as a leader, you are now much more mentally challenged to process this data yourself and actually integrate it into your daily routine, not only to manage day-to-day operations better, but also to make decisions. What this also enables, of course, is to increase the speed as well. Making decisions, that's really the art of leadership, as I always say. My job basically consists of making, 50 decisions a day. So do we go ahead with the project or not? Is the margin sufficient? Yes or no? Do we go into the bid or not? Do we enter into a new partnership or not? And in the past, these decisions were often made based on experience and intuition, but today you can make them much more data-driven and, so to speak, set up these actions much more precisely, like, for example, a partnership, or as in this case, deliberately entering a specific project and so on. And I think that's actually the truly great opportunity I see here, that it genuinely relieves me, but at the same time, it also makes me a better and, I would say, more mature leader, if that's what I truly want. And of course, I also learn an incredible amount every day, because all the knowledge I query there, I naturally incorporate into decisions and conversations. And that, of course, gives me an incredible learning curve. And I think similar things are happening with the employees, who then specifically say to themselves, hey, I'm a Java developer, and now I have a specific topic or requirement from a client. How do I implement that technically? Yes, there are even suggestions when it comes to coding and so on. And I think, and this is the power of AI, you can actually role and responsibility specific, just as I described it in my role as CEO, from a developer to a trainee to an HR specialist, or even someone in accounting. Anyone can acquire and access job relevant knowledge at any time by using these tools. And that's why it's important for us to create these access points. This is the gateway I mentioned at the beginning, where we enable employees to get help at any time to actually do their job or task better, more efficiently, and maybe even faster.
Great, David. And looking at the time, that really just flew by. We're almost at half an hour. First of all, thank you very much for your insights. And I really liked that you said your job as a leader, your job as a CEO will not be replaced by AI. You use it as a sparring partner, as a supplement to increase speed, to reduce complexity, by having many things presented to you in a simplified way and being able to do analyses. So it's a sparring partner, especially in the role of a leader. We can all look forward to seeing how this develops over the next years and decades, but I believe, and that's at least my opinion, that above all, it will remain human. Yes, and leadership will also remain human, because human abilities are still important. And with that, Mario, I think we are more or less at the end, and all that's left is for us to say thank you. I
still have one more question, because I thought that was good, and I completely agree with you. So at the end of the day, it's still the human who has to make the decision, but there are so many future scenarios out there. And I'm curious, David, what do you think leadership will look like in 5 to 10 years? And what role will AI play in that? Will AI suddenly start making a lot of decisions as well? Or, as you just stated earlier, you said that no, the decision must always be made by a human. But there are different levels of decisions, different levels of complexity. So I think some things, the relevant, important ones, should definitely continue to be made by humans. And on the other hand, you said there are repetitive tasks where a decision might also need to be made, but which have little consequence. How do you see this as a final question?
Yes, that's a tricky question to end with, but I'll try to answer it briefly. I believe that the topic of leadership is already undergoing a profound transformation over the next 5 to 10 years, especially when we look at the speed with which in just the last 2 years, we've integrated leadership, management, and the use of AI into our professional lives. That's really quite remarkable. But now it's really about the interplay between technology and us. Technology will determine how quickly we continue to transform ourselves, and I also hope how much better we become as people with its support. Then it's also about cultural change, because the topic of AI runs through all areas. It's not just in consulting like for us, but it really affects every industry. It affects everyday life, even in the private sphere. For example, my mom already uses AI and spends the whole day chatting with ChatGPT. That means there is a cultural shift happening, and there's also a certain societal expectation regarding what's coming. And I personally believe we need a certain level of regulation so that, so to speak, we can keep AI in check for ourselves and still control how much we want to use it and in what ways. I think that the topic of leadership will take on a somewhat hybrid approach, meaning both human and, to some extent, machine-driven through AI. We're going to move a bit into the topic of, let's say, augmented decision-making. That means, of course, you can use all these data-based recommendations accordingly, reflect on them, and then make context-specific decisions. AI will take over routine analyses and so on. However, leadership will continue to focus strongly on people. This means that people really need to be placed at the center of every company and must also be protected and supported to some extent. That means value-oriented, trustworthy leadership with clear communication is important. In other words, you have to clearly communicate to employees as well as to customers and partners how the company is using AI and what benefits it brings. One major challenge we will face, but we won't discuss that today, we can cover it in another podcast, is how will our business model change? Because I don't think that in 5 to 10 years we'll still be charging classic time and materials or daily rates for IT services or consulting. Instead, it will be more about consumption-based or performance-based pricing. There will be a really big transformation in that area. I believe that in the future, a leader will have to act much more as a coach and really drive the enablement of employees, because as the saying goes, we are only as strong as the weakest member of our team. That means you actually have to really bring everyone along with you, but people also have to be willing. That means we really have to make sure that we establish a culture that doesn't close itself off to such technological changes, but instead clearly sees them as opportunities. And honestly, employees' willingness to learn will become a necessity, because anyone who isn't willing to learn and use the AI topic as a constant coach and source of input will eventually be left behind. And yes, we have to remain human, but we also need to approach AI topics courageously and consciously, and the leadership culture must be clearly strengthened. So, from my point of view, leadership is more important than ever.
So, without realizing it, David, you picked up on our motto that André and I promote here: stay human. So great. I think that was a great closing statement from you. There's really not much to add to that. The only thing you might say is, stay human in leadership with AI.
All right, then thank you all.
Yes, thank you very much. Not David.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you, David. It was fun, and there were some great insights. Thank you very much for that. And with that, I would say it is now the appropriate time to end the call. I want to extend many sincere thanks to you all, and of course, to all our wonderful listeners. We hope you enjoyed listening, and please feel absolutely free to recommend us to others.
Goodbye for now.